Welcome everyone to the Explorers Club, Australia and New Zealand chapter. It's great to have everyone here. Thank you. I'm Todd Tye, chapter chair. For those of you who don't know, the Explorers Club was founded in 1904. So for the last 113 years, our members have been dedicated to the advancement of field research, scientific exploration, and the resource conservation, and the ideal that it's vital for the extinct to explore. We have 30 chapters around the world, and this is the Australia and New Zealand chapter. Our members were the first to the North Pole, first to the South Pole, first to land on the moon, and first to the deepest points of the ocean and to climb the highest mountains. We conduct hundreds of expeditions every year. The club has about 3,000 members worldwide, and in Australia we have about 100 members. I would like to acknowledge all of our club members who are here tonight. There are about 17, but I'd especially like to acknowledge our 3 members who've come in two from New York and one from the UK, Lauren and Alex, and I'd especially like to welcome a board member from New York Explorers Club, Damien Leloup. Where are you? Damien, there he is. He's got a hand. Could you stand up for a second, please? I am going to embarrass you. I'd just like to say, guys, whoever saw Jacques Cousteau when he was on the Calypso, remember that? Crew member. I kid you not. I think that's so cool. So if you'd like to become a member, just go to our website or see our awesome membership manager, David Strike, who's just down the back. You would have seen tonight too, we have some awesome t-shirts, and we also did for sale, that's for a first, that we've just made our t-shirts. And also to Valerie Taylor has got her brand new book, Melody the Mermaid. And it's a fantastic story. It's like Game of Thrones underwater, but for kids. And it also has she's done all the illustrations herself, and it also has a colouring in companion. So with Christmas coming up, I can't think of a better gift for kids. And of course, tonight you get her at a discount and you get it signed. And that leads me to introduce our first speaker tonight. We have 2 speakers tonight, Valerie Taylor and Mike McDowell. Thank you. And Valerie, as we all know, is a national treasure. Most Australians of my vintage saw the Barrier Reef and the underwater world for the first time through the lens of Valerie and her late husband, Ron. And for that, Australia has a great debt of gratitude to you, if not the world. And I acknowledge you for that. At the moment, though, I'd just like to welcome Valerie Taylor to present tonight a great moment in her life when she filmed Blue Water, White Death. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Valerie.
Thank you, Todd. That was very nice, very humbling. I was asked to come and speak about a great adventure. I'd say everybody in this room has had great adventures. I have had a life of adventure. Nobody has had a better life than me. But at one time, in 1969, my husband and I had an adventure no one had ever had before, and it can never be repeated. I mean, it's a great adventure to row from Australia to New Zealand, but someone else can do that too. The adventure we had was a one-off, can never happen again. We spent 6 months living on a Norwegian whale catcher, the old-fashioned type with the big engines that go choo, 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 like that, with men down below stripped almost naked, putting, I don't know what, into big fires, something. And so I'm going to talk about living on a whale catcher and hunting for the great white shark that the Americans believed came in to feed on the whales, which actually Ron and I knew they didn't. But you try telling a very wealthy, famous American that he's wrong, and you're just a humble Australian. It doesn't work. Oh, there I am. I'm probably most well known for the mesh suit. It's an idea that Ron had in 1965 when he saw a butcher wearing butcher's boning gloves. And he worked out from history that if you could build a mesh suit, a shark's teeth couldn't penetrate, because it's an ancient idea which worked very well against arrows and swords, and then they invented the crossbow. It didn't work against the crossbow, and it became unfashionable. Now, can you just run through those? That was the cover of National Geographic. I'm probably one of the few people who's been on the cover of National Geographic and taken a photograph for them. And I didn't work for them. Just keep going. This is me, of course, with a shark hanging on my arm. Blue Water White Death was our big adventure. An American called Peter Gimble, he's the guy right at the end there, myself and Ron, and another American called Stanton Waterman, went on this whale catcher because Peter Gimble had the money and he wanted to make a film about the greatest shark in the world. At the time, Ron was the only person who had ever filmed one underwater. We saw without a cage. Peter designed these cages. This is my beautiful husband in one of them. They would have withstood a Sherman tank. They were so strong. This is the deck of a whale catcher. It's not very clean. It's not the best place in the world to live, but it certainly was different. The underwater lights, and we're going back to 1969, by the way. Nowadays, you'd have a small thing you could hold in your hand. This is what we had back in 1969. And that beautiful man there is my husband. The camera equipment, they were Arries, and they were in these huge housings, very difficult to handle underwater. The tanks we used were 72 steel, very heavy. And that's pretty much how we looked underwater. That's my husband, with one of the cameras. That's the above water camera. His name was Jim Lipscomb, and he was very good. He lugged that great big thing around on his shoulder all day, just following us. It's Peter Matheson, the writer. He wrote The Sea Where Man Was Born. And this is the whale catcher we lived on. It was rusty. It was difficult. In rough weather, you couldn't walk along the decks because the waves broke over it. You had to walk through the engine room, which was pretty grim. And we were out looking for these sharks. The sharks we got were called Longomanus, Cocorhinus longomanus. They are responsible for more human deaths than all the other sharks in the world put together. They're an open ocean shark. You don't have to worry about them off Sydney. We were 100 miles out to sea. These are just blow-ups from the cinema film. And we followed the whale catchers because the sharks came into the harpooned whales. It's a terrible thing to see a whale die. And you mightn't believe it, but they cry. That's a white-tipped oceanic Longomanus. Very dangerous. It's the only shark that's ever put Ron and I out of the water. But it wasn't on this trip. There's Ron just working with one of the sharks. There were hundreds of them around, and this is at night, working with them at night. Every evening, the whales that harpooned were towed back to shore to the fencing station. They were pulled up on a ramp, loaded onto a train, and chuffed around to be cut up. It's a sad thing. We're still killing whales, and we shouldn't. They're highly intelligent. You learn to love them. This is the whale that we bought, and as you can see, the sharks really pulled it apart. All the sharks, except for maybe half a dozen, were oceanic white tips. Occasionally a whale gave birth on the tracks. It was a sad thing. A small, perfect little whale. Something people don't know is that the Shah of Persia, his son, gave them money to two of my friends who had power to have the Indian Ocean made a whale sanctuary. Eventually, we got the Americans to listen to us. It took 6 months, but they finally did, and we came to South Australia. We knew there were white sharks there. That's me. I've got to get out of the cage, and it's a wee bit difficult because that shark is giving me a hard time. I have to get out of the cage into that tin boat. We were working in South Australia on a small yacht. We didn't have a whale catcher anymore. And that's my husband and I down in the shark cage with the shark going past. You can always tell me I wore that face mask, that big blue face mask. I refused to wear the black one. There I am yelling for help. Every time I tried to get out, that shark would push the cage away from the boat. And I had no air, and I just wanted to get out. I was sick of the whole thing. And there's the shark going crazy on the cage, and I'm still saying, get me out of here. And the conditions we lived under were very, very tight. Not primitive, just very tight. That was a dining room. From my photographs that I took of the shark against the bars. It's Ron working, shark pushing his nose in. Now we've gone to a different species of shark. These are reef sharks, and there's a bait on the bottom, and they are circling the bait. As you can see, we've had lots of covers, lots of adventures, and that's only a very small portion of it. We've also met other sharks, such as great hammerheads, white shark rising out of the water to look at us. It's against the law now to make them do this, by the way. That's Ron out of the cage at Guadalupe filming a great white, and that is the first time ever a great white was filmed in the water and underwater, and Ron did it hanging off the back of a tuna boat. That's Ron hanging off the back. There's just a photograph of a great white. They have good teeth. They love blood. That's blood from a whale. And I befriended one. They've all got different personalities. People don't know this. Every shark has a different personality. That's my hand. And we called him Joe. And he's taking a fish. It took a while to get him to do this. He was a bit shy. Gave him a little pat for being a good boy. And you notice how he's closed his eye? They don't close their eye, actually. He's rolled it back to protect it. He thought I might be going to hurt his eye. And I'm just saying, good boy, Joe. Then we went on to Jaws. This is the filming of Jaws, where everything but the shark was half size. We had to make our 14-foot sharks look 24-foot. And they're very big. I thought Volvo might buy this from me as to show that their motors were very good and very strong, but they weren't interested. In fact, they were horrified. Well, it's just a portrait. Now, those three men, except for the old one, the three men, have all been bitten by sharks. Rodney Fox, Henry Bross, and Brian Rogers. The old guy has killed over 100 great whites. He's a game fisherman. This is just a shark coming up for the baits. This is all supposed to be about great adventure, and I suppose it was. But the biggest adventure of all was Blue Water White Death. And this is a shot from Blue Water White Death. Spearfishing was a big thing in those days. You can't get fish like that anymore on one dive. You're lucky if you get one fish on one dive. It's my husband filming for Jaws. We did get a very big shark in, as you can see. Huge. And they didn't want bars in the film, so he had to get out the top of the cage and not show bars. And there we are on the beach at Martha's Vineyard. And that really young bloke on the left, that's Steven Spielberg, and it's Roy Schneider and the producer, and then me, looking young, and Ron. And that's just a fun shot. There's a few more shots. Sharks aren't the horrible things that people think. You can get to know them if you understand them, and you know when you feel in danger, just stay still. Don't move around, just stay nice and still. It'll all work. There's Ron, he's a very young man, and he's holding his very first underwater camera, and he's got the housing there that he made himself. There were no housings for underwater cameras back in the 50s and 60s. There we are in our mesh suits, which actually worked very well and are still used today. And there's Ron in his workshop. He was a genius. He made all his housings, all my housings, and he could also make a lens. Now that was really clever. He was the world spearfishing champion, the Australian spearfishing champion 4 times. We're not proud of it. We did a lot of tests, including the test with the banded suit, because scientists said sharks would be afraid of the banded suit. It looked like a sea snake. They're not afraid of sea snakes, and they certainly weren't afraid of me. There's a whale. How could you kill something like this? That is the sister. The mother is above, and she's carrying her little brother on her back. We spent a lot of time with this little baby. It had only just been born. All the sisters, the mother and the grandmother stayed with it, taking care of it. I made friends with many marine animals. That was Honey the eel, and I still know her 30 years down the track. She's still one of my friends, you know. And that's just off the coast here, actually. That's a big jellyfish getting along. That's the phony shark they used for Jaws. We couldn't have a real shark eating an actor. They had to have a pretend shark eating the actor. Every time you see a whole shark, it's an Australian shark. These sharks were left to right, right to left, front on. You couldn't show them all because they had hydraulic cables going into them. But what I really wanted to tell you all is that I've had a very adventurous life, but my biggest adventure was Blue Water White Death. There's nobody in this room.
The search begins on the whaling ground.
This is it.
It's 100 miles off Durban. Sharks attracted by harpoon whales infest these waters. The Terrier follows the whaling fleet.
Our first dive, 100 miles. miles at sea, 6,000 feet to the bottom. Key shark. A great blue. Sharks of the open sea, like these, have no air bladder to buoy them, and they must keep moving all their lives or sink. No great fight.
The day's catch is towed to Durban.
Look at that action. None of the divers, nor anyone they know, has ever been outside of a cage among feeding sharks.
I said to Peter, if you go out, I will. I just wanted to see if he got eaten or lived first. And there were a lot of sharks, a great many, and they were interested in us. So I opened the door and let Peter out. I wasn't in the same cage as my husband Ron. And I noticed every time a shark came close to Peter, he banged it with that huge metal camera housing. This sort of adventure can never be done again. The whales have gone and the sharks have been caught for shark fin soup. But never been done before. That was my husband. He's doing the still photography at the time. We spent 3 weeks out of the cage, but in the film Blue Water White Death, which was a feature film, it looked as though we only did it once. I had a stick, a power head actually, which I was supposed to defend everybody with the power head. I was just flat out defending myself. There's Ron and me. Me again. And I tell you, it's very exciting. I wasn't frightened. I don't get frightened. I get angry. Stay away. I'm screaming at them, stay away, get back, the whole time. Sometimes it got a little bit hectic. The big problem was we were all overweighted, and it was about 3,000 feet to the bottom. The last thing we wanted to do was find ourselves floating on the surface. But for sheer excitement, it's very hard to top something like this. It's an odd place for someone who started out life, working life as a painter. These oceanic white tips during World War II took people in the water by the hundred. We worked with them outside the cage for over 2 weeks, and they eventually accepted us as part of the pack. We'd just go down and they would swim around, but they wouldn't try to bump us anymore. But if you weren't part of the pack, just one bite and you'd be finished. The cages were tied to the whale, not the ship, which worried me a little because the whales were pumped full of air so they'd float, and I always wondered what would happen if a shark bit through into the air bladder and dragged us all down thousands of feet. We had buoyancy control inside the cage, which we used our own air for. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? Good. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Not a question, just a statement. That your hairstyle hasn't changed since then.
Your hairstyle's the same.
Actually, yes. Almost. Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? John's got one.
Well, how much adrenaline was there?
I think at times we were all living on adrenaline, but I was never afraid. I don't think anybody was afraid. It was exciting. It was something that nobody had done before, ever, and no one can ever do again because the sharks and the whales have gone. The world has changed. Thank you for listening. I have, but not for years. We have spoken. I've been over there. Yes, he doesn't look like a boy anymore.
He used to look like a girl.
Oh, darling, thank you.
I was going to say, was there any tigers or white sharks on that trip?
The question is, were there any tigers or white sharks? No. We knew where the white sharks were. 10 years later, we went back to where they were in South Africa. And before we dropped anchor, we'd seen 5. But we couldn't make the Americans go there. Anyhow, I'll hand you over to our leader.
Thanks, Valerie. I'd just like to add, actually, one little anecdote that I don't think you made this point strongly enough. I'm about to go away on a big diving trip. I do a couple of big trips every year. And on my trip, I realised it's time for me to get a new digital camera. I've had the last one for 8 years. So I just looked up Digital Diver website and I bought this package, which had a housing, camera, strobe, everything. Turned up a few days later. Back when they were doing, Ron and Valerie were doing their work in the 60s, this equipment didn't exist. There were no housings. You had to use, second-hand, 8mm cameras from World War II aircraft. Then you had to make the lenses for them to work underwater. Then Ron had to manufacture the housing. So you had to do everything. I just don't think you made that point clearly enough, and I think that's how my generation and many others saw the underwater world. That's how Jaws was made, through not only your diving, your photography, your filmmaking, but also your engineering, and we all owe you for that. So thank you for talking to us, and thank you for being with us at the Explorers Club. Guys, we're now going to break for about an hour, I guess, 45 minutes to an hour, have some dinner, have lots of good chats, and then we will come back and hear the amazing tales of Mike McDowell and all the untold stories of adventure, which should probably never not be heard. Thanks, guys.